if you could wave your magic wand, what would it take to increase production? Based on conversations with the oil and gas companies and the service companies, $98 oil and workforce. So we still have got thousands of jobs open in the state, hundreds, if not thousands of jobs open in the industry. So you've got a combination of two factors there. One is the uncertainty in the oil prices and that continued volatility, but just as heavy a weight on the industry is the inability to attract workforce. So if I had a magic wand, I would wave it and there would be a large herd of oil and gas workers appear. And the oil price, the NYMEX price would go to $98. We had record snowfall in November and record snowfall again in December. We seem to top the old record with each new record. So we'll get to that impact in just a minute. Looking at October production numbers, oil production was just as flat can be. About 0.02% change in production from September to October. So really no change, no measurable change whatsoever. We do want to note that New Mexico went up about 4%, and they just continue to experience those back-to-back production increases like we used to have 3 or 4 years ago. Eventually, the New Mexico play is going to mature like the Bakken, and we'll see that flatten out. Don't know where that's going to happen. When we look at natural gas production, it was actually down 1%, and I think that's interesting. I ought to speak to that just a little bit. I did a little bit of checking, and just about half of our drilling and completion activity is now taking place in Tier 2. So a large part of the activity has shifted out of the core area, which continues to experience growing gas oil ratio, into the much less drilled Tier 2 area. If you recall, excuse me, Tier 1 is 80 to 85% drilled out. Tier 2 is only about 50% drilled out. So we're seeing a lot more untapped reservoir with no depletion. And so we're seeing a lot lower gas oil ratios out in Tier 2. And so we may be seeing the beginning of a trend, which we've talked about, which was that we expected with the advent of 3-mile laterals, a lot more economic activity in Tier 2 and Tier 3 areas. And so, a couple interesting surprises. 2 of our counties with significant production increases were Divide and Burke. And we haven't talked about Divide County and Burke County for quite some time. So there's several indicators pointing to increased industry activity out in that Tier 2 and Tier 3 area. And that's all being brought about by the technology innovations that have allowed us to get to 3-mile laterals with virtually the same amount of time and expense as 2-mile laterals took in just a couple of years ago. Crude oil prices are down significantly, but they're still almost 50% above revenue forecast. So today we're estimating North Dakota crude is fetching about $73 a barrel. In October, it was around $84 a barrel. So there's a great deal of uncertainty in the crude oil markets, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But an interesting thing with the gas oil ratios, the rest of the numbers pretty stable. Saw a little bit of an uptick in active wells. That is not unusual as we go into fall and as we start to see people struggle to get workover rigs in to keep some of the lower producing wells on production. We hit an all-time high in terms of the number of wells actually producing, capable of production and actually producing. And just touching on the fact that frac crews, we had actually gotten to 20 frac crews in the state before the blizzard. But as of last week and certainly going into this week, there's virtually nobody completing wells. And so we're going to see an impact from that in production. And so we had seen a pretty significant uptick in the number of frac crews and a lot of duck wells being fracked, but that's changed now as we get into the really hard part of winter. And so that December, January, February typically are pretty low in terms of completion numbers. OPEC seems to be just managing world crude supplies on a month-to-month basis, kind of trying to gauge where the world economy is going and adjust appropriately. So you've got Russia sanctions, Russia price caps, China COVID lockdowns, and recessions or looming recessions in many of the OECD countries. And so OPEC is trying to balance all of that, and it's creating a significant amount of volatility in the oil markets as news comes out one way or the other. Natural gas storage is just about we're at the 5-year average, but with the much colder weather setting in and with LNG exports rising rapidly to Europe, we're seeing very strong natural gas prices, $6.76 an MCF. And so those are really good natural gas prices, unlike the days when we saw 20 to 25 to 1 crude oil to natural gas prices. We're about 11 to 1 right now. So significant incentives for natural gas capture. And it's great to see that every single category from statewide to fee Fort Berthold Reservation is well above the 91% capture number that the Industrial Commission requires. Industrial Commission tomorrow will be looking at comments that I have written on the BLM EA, which is looking at leases from 2015 to 2020 and the social cost of greenhouse gases and how that perhaps should impact permitting and whether those leases should be canceled or what should go on there. So we'll be looking at comments tomorrow. I've submitted those to the commission members and they're reviewing those. We are contemplating litigation in that area, particularly surrounding the failure to hold first quarter, third quarter, and fourth quarter lease sales for North Dakota tracts. There are hundreds of tracts that are available for leasing, but the leasing is just not happening. Our current estimate is somewhere between 300,000 and 400,000 barrels a day shut in as a result of the blizzard. Day 1, 2, 3, they held in there pretty good, but as you saw, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, there was no travel advised anywhere in the state of North Dakota. So crude oil trucks were not moving, pumpers weren't on the road, tanks filled up and wells were shut down. And so we're estimating that as of today, probably as of yesterday, we're below 1 million barrels a day, probably well below 1 million barrels a day. So industry is going to attempt to get back to work this week, but it's almost Christmas. So it's a holiday week, and we are anticipating following last week's snow, we're now going to go into a period where the daytime highs are going to be below zero. So it will be very difficult to get the roads open and get the wells back on. Once a well goes down in this kind of weather, it can be extremely challenging to get that pumping unit up and running again and get all the pumps and the equipment warm again so that you can maintain production. So probably a significant amount of that production will stay offline until after New Year's. I would expect it's going to take a few weeks to recover from all the shut-in wells. So as of right now, we're estimating at least 300,000 barrels a day that's shut in, which puts us down in that 800,000, 900,000 per day number, significantly below 1 million barrels a day. I think, it's a short part of December, so we should average over 1 million barrels a day, and hopefully the recovery will go pretty quickly after the first of the year. We'll see what January brings. This is the most significant difference between North Dakota and New Mexico. Is, you know, they're both shale plays, they're both oil plays, but we have winter.